Hello everybody, thank you for joining me today for my review of the 1995 comedy Empire Records. The film was directed by Allan Moyle and stars Liv Tyler and Renee Zelwegger, among many others who do a solid job in this film. I think the acting's pretty good overall. So Empire Records is one of those guilty pleasure comedies for me, apparently for a lot of other people too. I didn't realize how popular this film still was, the following it had, till I looked it up on the internet. And I think that's probably because Empire Records, one of its greatest strengths, it does have a few flaws which I'll get into, but one of its greatest strengths is that I think it represents the mid-90s scene very well in terms of culture and in terms of exactly what it would have been like in a record store at this time period. Part of the reason I relate to this film so much is one of my hobbies was, and still is, browsing record stores and movie stores, being able to listen to stuff in the store and kind of discover new things, or sometimes just take a chance and buy something that looked like it would be really interesting. Still like to do that. It's getting kind of harder and harder to find these kind of stores, but I still enjoy browsing from time to time if I can. So the main plot of Empire Records is it follows a group of teens who all work in a record store, and of course there's some drama about the store being bought out by a bigger chain, things like that. One of the big strengths of this film is the pacing. There's a lot of characters in this film, and they all pretty much have their own stories, and for the most part, they're all fleshed out really well. I still kind of miss when movies could do this in 90 minutes. I feel like if Empire Records was made today, it would have to be like 2.5 hours, but that's a rant for another day. So there's many plots, many characters in this film, and they all interconnect, of course, and it could feel kind of contrived, but I think it works very naturally in this film, and all the stories and characters seem believable to me. Now, you could argue that some of the characters, maybe even all the characters, are stereotypes in this film, like each one fits a certain criteria and someone that you would have known in the 90s. I certainly knew people that were like quite a few of the characters in this film, but I think the characters are written well enough that they work, and they feel more like representations of different type of people than they do stereotypes, which is always a good thing. Empire Records is also one of those films where the soundtrack is all songs. This was at a time where this was still a thing. There's not really a score, but the song selection is good in this film. They do use a lot of 90s music, but they use music from other eras as well, and the songs pretty much fit the scenes pretty well. I will say there's a few songs I could have done without, but when you have a film that has this many songs in it, there's always going to be a few that you don't care for or might have changed. Overall, I would say the soundtrack is very good and representative of the time. If I had to say a couple things possibly negative about this film, there are a few dated jokes. Some of the references might not land if you didn't grow up around this time period. I graduated in the mid-90s, so if you want to figure out my age from there, feel free. So, I got a lot of the references of the time period, but they could go over your head. Sometimes the problem with this type of movie is if you're not familiar with that time period, it doesn't all connect. But I think the movie's still interesting enough anyway. This is a small complaint. There's a subplot with an aging pop star musician that visits the store, and I thought this subplot was pretty good in terms of character development and connecting all the plots together, but it just kind of suddenly leaves about 2/3 of the way through the film, never comes back, and I feel like they could have done a little more with it. This is the one thing in the film I thought could have been fleshed out a little more, but then maybe the film would have had to be longer, so I guess that's fine as well. So overall, I just really enjoy Empire Records. I still try and watch it once every couple years or so. It's kind of a reminder of the mid-90s and some of the things I used to enjoy doing at that time. Would I recommend this film? I would say if you're a fan of these types of 80s or 90s comedies, this one was made in 95, like I said earlier. Or if you just want to see a good representation of maybe stories you've heard or what things were like in this time period, I would recommend Empire Records. If you're not into these kind of 90s teen comedies and this doesn't sound like something that would interest you, then I don't think it's an essential film. But I definitely think for a certain audience, Empire Records is a very good film, and I'm glad that there's others out there who still enjoy it as well. So that will do it for my review of Empire Records. Thank you very much for watching.